Here in Mexico, there's an action called a pro forma action. So that's, hey, if you complied with the contract and the seller will not sign the deed, you can sue and get a judicial deed. So we make sure all contracts are rock solid, and it's easy to comply with the contract. All the terms specified, the bank accounts to deposit to, dates to deposit, everything. So if the seller breaches, then you can sue and get a judicial deed.
Welcome to Live by Design Mexico Edition, the podcast about creating freedom, adventure, and a life in Mexico that truly feels like your own. I'm your host, Taniel Chemsian. If you've been dreaming of warmer days, smarter investments, and a future designed on your terms, your journey begins here. Every week, we dive into stories, insights, and strategies to help you make Mexico not just a destination, but a new way of life. We've got so much to cover today, we had to split it into 2 episodes. So settle in and don't miss a moment. Don't wait for life to happen. Design it. And it starts right here. Hi, Spencer. Welcome to the podcast.
Morning. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Spencer, tell us, you're an American. You made your way to Mexico. So if you could tell our viewers and listeners, how did that happen? What were you doing in the United States before moving to Mexico? And what do you do now?
Well, in the U.S., I was a mortgage banker and a broker. I had direct underwriting authority, so I was actually able to approve loans and then broker out certain loans. I would cherry pick the best ones. I would underwrite myself, fund myself, and we were closing stuff very fast. Santa Barbara is a different market, very high net worth, high-end clientele there. We also did funding and investment of retirement funds, things like that, did all the escrows. But I could see a bubble happening. In the early 2000s. And I thought, this is going to bust. And Santa Barbara's expensive. And I knew a lot of people there who were working 2 or 3 jobs. You could make $100,000 a year there in the early 2000s and still be poor, drive a Toyota and live in an apartment. And I said, that doesn't seem too appetizing, especially when a house in the barrio, 2-bedroom, built in 1920, was $800,000. And once you pay off your 30-year mortgage, you would take your $1,500 Social Security check to pay your property tax.
Yeah.
I thought, maybe there's something different out there. And coincidentally, I'd been living off and on with the market swings up and down. When the market was down, you can't fight it. So I go travel the world, Caribbean. I made myself a dive master in the Cayman Islands, and that just kind of happened. So I go there diving, training students, and a friend had a house there. I would help him manage his things. And then right before the hurricane hit in about 2004, he sold out. And then he told me in 2004, I remember going diving in Cancun, hey, I bought a house in this place called Chapala. You should come visit. Well, I went to visit and thought, wow, it's not hot and humid like Cancun. The weather's nice, a lot of foreigners. I speak Spanish, so there might be a future here. Then I found a large property, right in the center of town, right near the church, the plaza, the Malecon, and I got it for $100,000 and thought, I'll split this into 3 units. So what would have been a down payment in Santa Barbara, not even a down payment, bought me an entire property, and my property taxes are still about $100 a year. Maybe they're about $120 here 20 years later. And I thought, I'm going to retire, leave the rat race. I was still doing some banking stuff, actually ghostwriting legal briefs for some attorneys to make money on the side. And I thought, well, I'll just rent out the 2 other apartment units and live simply. But then I got bored. After remodeling the property, I thought, well, what's a good challenge? I always wanted to be an attorney. Why not go to law school? So then I enrolled in law school, and
in Mexico.
In Mexico.
Okay.
And I had spoken Spanish, learned it growing up because my grandma spoke Spanish. She's from Spain. So I had that behind me, and I didn't speak it much in the U.S. because Spaniards are kind of different from Mexicans and everyone else. It just wasn't our culture. We'd go with the old folks in South San Francisco, where my grandma lived, and they play what Hialeah, and they had the Spaniard society there. It was just a different culture than you had from the Mexican culture. But I had Mexican clients and friends to speak Spanish with, but not that often. And then now down in Mexico, I thought, well, let's go to law school. And I had my cheat sheet of words that I kept forgetting the meaning of, because Mexican Spanish is different and Mexican legal Spanish is still different. And then was finishing up law school, saw an ad in the local newspaper. Chapala Civil Court needs people to work there, and went there, my suit, my grades, my resume. The judge says, want to start tomorrow? I said, sure. So I worked in the Chapala courts 2 years, and then I worked in the state Supreme Court 6 months and opened my office, and here I am.
That's a lot. What a great accomplishment. So let's talk about your schooling. What was it like going to law school? And did you go to law school in Guadalajara?
In Guadalajara, yes.
So can you explain to us what that was like? How old were you when you started? And
I was 34 when I started, and just, classes and different things. A few years into it, started working the courts, which was helpful because I worked with the notifier. So part of the job was to read the court files and write up summaries to notify the attorneys. And the fun part was we get to take the files to the attorney office. So I was the fun person to go with because I had a motorcycle. So I would say, who wants to jump on the back motorcycle with a big stack of files and drive around town honking and waving to everyone in the small town of Chapala and dropping up notifications to attorneys.
Wow. And how was it working in Chapala with the court system?
It was good. It was, Chapala encompasses a multi-municipal district for the courts, a large area. So I got to read files and meet people, and I always joke and tell people, well, if someone says they're an attorney in Chapala and they don't know me, they're not a real attorney, because how in the world can you go to the court and see some white guy working there and not ask, well, who is that guy?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure you stood out.
Yes. Yeah. They would kind of joke because you have Los Altos de Jalisco, people are white. They would joke and they'd say, oh, he's that compa from Tepa, from Jalos, from Arandas. And some people would buy it and someone would go, nah, he looks pretty gringo.
So explain to me about your law firm. What kind of law do you practice, and who are your clients? So
I have 2 offices. I have one in Chapala, one in Guadalajara. Mainly do immigration, and it's planning. Someone wants to move to Mexico, so we look at their profile and help them put their best foot forward. If it's not due to family, because family is a bit of an easier process, or was, recent changes made it, a little glitchy, but help people prepare their packet for the consulate, make the appointment. They go there, they get their pre-approved visa, then help them register it in Mexico. Basically, the whole circle of life for foreigners. Registering the visa, getting their tax ID number, reviewing property deeds when they're going to purchase, reviewing rental contracts so they understand the rights and obligations, and then dealing with sometimes banking and insurance issues, and then help them with estate planning. Many people, there are more younger people coming, but in years past, generally people were over 60. So it's estate planning. It's okay. People come in, hey, I have a famous article I wrote, How to Die in Mexico, which is tips and planning. So when the time comes, you've got everything prepared. You're not leaving a mess for your loved ones.
Well, question, you said you're getting a lot of younger people that you're helping with their immigration services now. Are most of your clients from the United States and Canada?
In my Chapala office, maybe about 60-70% are, and about 30 to 40% Mexican. In my Guadalajara office, it's maybe the reverse, about 40% American. Oh, that's kind of growing a little bit. And the rest are Mexicans who have, U.S. banking issues or want U.S. tourist visas or need translations. I'm also an official federal state court translator and on the U.S. consulate list of translators. So I've been doing that for about 15 years. So people, for validity of documents in either country, they want an official translator to the translation. So I have the federal and state court approvals as well as Guadalajara municipal approval. So people need to search me out so they'll have the translations accepted, whether it's for immigration, for the tax authorities, for the courts, for the civil registry, for probate case, for getting married, for registering children, all those items.
That's great. And then are you getting clients from other parts of Mexico, or is it just primarily in Guadalajara and Chapala?
We have, I have a little cluster in Mérida because we help some people out, help other people out. I have another cluster in Oaxaca because one lady called and she said, Oaxaca is like a different world of Mexico, and immigration just wouldn't give her work papers. So she flew to Chapala, lived there. We processed the work permission, and then she flew back, and they really couldn't take her work permission away. Then she referred me to people because about 5 or 10 years ago, maybe it's still the case, there weren't English-speaking attorneys who were competent there to help out foreigners. So I had a little cluster of clients growing, even though I had no office. So sometimes it's a little challenging. We help some people get visas, and the pandemic hit, and there was a stay on expiration dates. So clients turned paperwork in, and they denied them and said, "Oh, I got denied. What do? I have to leave Mexico." I says, "No, I'll file an appeal." Prepared the appeal, emailed it, and said, "Print 3 copies, sign, and give it to them." And it was for a couple. We won both their appeals. So they were very happy and refer me. So I've got my cluster of people in Oaxaca, cluster of people in Merida, and then sporadically other areas. I don't like working in other areas because it's not the personal touch. If it's purely paperwork, if it's a translation, it's some federal issue, then no problem. While Mexican law is cookie cutter, the civil code in every state is virtually the same, but not exact. So there could be 2 words difference in an article in the civil code. That can make all the difference. Plus, there's the home court advantage. There's court criteria, which you're not going to know unless you're there. So my goal is to win cases and give good service, not just do work to make a little bit of money and maybe the client's prejudiced.
Well, from your experience, what are some of the biggest legal risks foreigners make when buying a property in Mexico?
I mean, a lot of the issues are not investigating the property. I mean, that's a broad question. I can go over a few things. One is pre-sales. And that's always been challenging and very dynamic. So one is if the seller, many of the sellers use illegal contracts. They don't use ones approved by Profeco, which is the Federal Consumer Protection Agency. And many of them are one-sided and abusive, where they want 90 or 100% of all the money for construction before anything's been built. Well, if they've got no skin in the game, what's their motivation to finish the project? What if something's off? So right there at a disadvantage. And I've warned clients against these projects, and they've bowed out, and they've called me later and said, "You see, the project went bust. Thanks for warning me out," or or warning me. I mean, if I can, I don't say, "Oh, icky poo, don't buy." I try to say, "Look, here's your risk. Let's quantify it." So if it's worth it, let's say the risk. One property, a new property was built. They didn't get the IMSS sign off, which is the Workers' Compensation Social Security. They can go back 5 years. Generally, the builder, who knows where they're at, but they'll put a lien on the property.
Can you explain when you say they can go back 5 years? What does that mean? What is
so
that?
Many, when you build a property, you have workers' compensation, you've got insurance for the workers, things like that. For a constructionist, it's a high-risk activity. The insurance premium, so the government, can be equal to the wages. So the labor cost can be doubled. So many people don't pay it. But they do audits. What the government officials will do, because I have a friend here in Guadalajara, and that's what he does. He works for IMSS. He will go look at the building records and look at records 4 years old. Why 4 years? Because they have 5 years to file the claim. And this lets penalties and interest build up for 4 years, and he gets a commission off of that. So that's what they do. They do the searching for the records, and they can't find the builder. They're going to put a lien on the property. So what I'll do is, if someone bought a property and there was construction on it and it wasn't registered, we'll look and see, well, how many square meters should they build? Then I'll message my buddy and say, how much are you fining them per square meter? So instead of saying don't buy the property, I can say, all right, 100 square meters was built. They're going to use 1,500 a square meter. So that's going to give you this amount if you get caught. So if it's equal to $15,000, are you buying the property? Are you overpaying for it? Not a good deal. If you're getting the property 20, 25,000 below value, then a potential risk of 15,000, and we look at when that risk terminates, might not be a bad deal. And it's a negotiating factor.
So are you talking about like the manifestation of construction when they add additional square meters of construction to an existing property?
Well, they would have to register and pay IMSS for the workers when they do that extra work.
So let's go back to pre-construction and like people putting 90% down, 80% down. I don't know what the market is like in Chapala, if you guys have a lot of pre-construction over there, but in Puerto Vallarta, I think there are over 200 buildings in the Bay of Banderas where Vallarta is located. And there are some developers that are reputable developers. They have a long track history of successful projects they've completed. And typically, if a buyer is putting 80%, 70%, 90% down, is because they're getting a huge discount. Now, of course, there are risks involved, right? The project may never get completed. And I always recommend to our buyer clients, hire a reputable attorney to review the developer contracts to make sure, like you said, it's not one-sided. And how are you protected in the event the project is not completed? So for someone that is willing to put 90% down because they're getting a massive discount, like 20%, 25, sometimes 30%, how would you safeguard them? What advice would you give them so they're protected? And I know you can't protect someone at 100%. There's only so much you can do. So what are some of the red flags to look out for in a contract? And how would you advise them to make some changes in that contract? Or would you just say, hey, you know what? Don't do it at all?
No, I mean, don't do it would be bad on my part. I would explain the risk and say, well, it's bad anytime you have, the funds in a perfect world should be, in theory, staggered. All right, here's your down payment, you need money. And then as things go up, increase the down payment. You've got some people who want all the money paid in 6 months or a year, but will deliver in 2 years without having any benchmark. Hey, all right, this money will be payable in this time period, or extended until a certain level is reached on the construction.
A certain milestone, the foundation is done, up to the 4th level is done, and so forth.
Yes. Yeah, you need to have something kind of guaranteeing that, because it's also how amenable the seller, the builder is to changing. You have many that say it's my way or the highway. They think, oh, if not this person, I'll find someone else. And you've got to check out the risk factors. You've got to say, all right, maybe if the builder's reputable, they built many projects, maybe the risk is lower, but it's not nil, because maybe this is the project that he's going to fail. You also have,
and it's happened before.
And you have 2 other risk factors that are hidden that real estate people often don't check, that we're seeing that we are really going back. So we're not going back to the sale prior to when the builder acquired it. We almost need to go even further back to see, was the property Indian land or ejido land? And were there conditions on the regularization of that, and try to see if that was done properly, because there's no statute of limitations on ejido if something's bad. As well as another issue that's been in the news recently, especially on the coast there, is you have corrupt politicians have strong-armed people into selling their land, and they've been developing and they've been annulling property transfers. So I have a federal system where I can check corporations and entities. So now what we're doing, if someone's buying on the coast, I'm looking and seeing if it's ABC Builders, the seller, I'm looking who are their partners in there, and checking on the internet if they ever held public office. Because if they did, it's not a guarantee that they acquired the property illegally, but it's a risk factor if you have a politician who's corrupt, who is part of a corporation that acquired and is selling a property, because you've got a lot of these issues that are coming out, and people need to know those facts to weigh the risk.
That was a lot of information you just gave me. Let's kind of go back 2 minutes. You mentioned ejido land. For a lot of our listeners and our viewers, they don't know what that means. Could you please explain what is ejido?
Ejido, so it's like in the U.S., if you're buying on an Indian reservation. Who can buy on it? Only Indians. So you have the same thing here. So ejido land is for the workers. So in the past, you had the poor Mexicans were driven off their land by the rich landowners and got nothing. So years back, the government gave grants to the poorest Mexicans to work and cultivate certain properties and parcels so they could provide for their families. There is a procedure to disincorporate or remove the property from being the Indian or ejido land and making it private property.
What is that process like?
So they have to hold a meeting. They hold an annual meeting, which they generally have in December, which is Christmas time, because many of the family members or potential heirs live in the U.S., and they have to vote, and everyone votes, are we going to disincorporate this piece of property? And then there are other procedures they need to do. There need to be notifications to the comisario or the head of the ejido and all those people to be able to have the notification done for the meeting and then register at the National Agrarian Registry. And then there will often be a deed issued. And when there's a deed issued, many people never read the back of the deed, because when you read the back of the deed, it's out of the ejido, but it says in the fine print, hey, upon the first sale, because this deed taking it out is still in the ejido or Indian person's name, but it says you must give the first right of refusal to the ejido, the municipality, the state, and the federal government. Many people just, especially notaries that don't do agrarian law, skip over that and they just do a regular deed. But that leaves the opportunity open for someone to attack it and say, hey, we never got the first right of refusal to buy that property.
And how would they notify them, like, okay, I'm going to put this up for sale? I mean, do they put a notification in a newspaper? How does that work?
So the best way is, and I worked with agrarian attorneys who've done this, they'll get a notary public, they'll do a written request and say, ejido, with the notary there, we're notifying you that this property is for sale for this price. We're giving you the right to purchase it. And they have a time period, or sometimes on the spot, if they know them, they'll say, no, we'll waive that right, and do the same thing with each level of government. Now here, I say notary. It's not the girl that took a class and paid $20 for a bond. Here, notaries are a high level of attorney. They have a special commission. They're like judges and can take evidence. So with the notary there, he does what's called a fe de hechos, or it's like taking evidence, saying he certifies as evidence, like a judge would, that this person did this action. They notified this person. And that's the best way to avoid someone saying, well, you never notified me. I wasn't there, kind of a thing.
So when they do give the notification, does someone have 30 days, 60 days to?
Yeah, no, I forget the exact time, but I think it's 30 days or less.
Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the coastline and the politician being part of a corporation who buys this land. So what have you seen recently, and how has it been resolved, or is it just a legal mess right now?
Well, normally whenever we help out with a purchase and there is someone who is doing a sale, we will pull the Secretary of Economy's records on the entity selling. The main purpose to see is the person signing the contract empowered to sign the contract, because here Mexico is very formal. If I see here powers of attorney granted for this corporation or entity, and one of the names that signed it's not on there, then you have an invalid contract. Or you have a person that signed the contract with only powers, administrative acts, but not power of sale. So they really cannot sell the property. And then in the news, you had a lot of controversy, a lot of coastal properties, people are coming out and saying, no, I had a gun to my head. I was forced to sign this over to this corrupt politician. And they've been annulling deeds and shutting down properties and shutting down construction. So we're taking things a step further. And actually, before I would do background checks on the legal representative in the court computer system, but now we're actually doing checks not to see if they have criminal charges or pending suits against them, but to see if they're ever involved in politics. Because if they were, a governor, a senator, someone important, there's a risk factor that maybe they strong-armed or stole the property, and that could be invalidated years down the road. It could. Not saying it will be, but it's just another red flag or risk factor that we like to tell the client so they can weigh that out in the whole of everything.
I mean, how can you verify that someone is being strong-armed? I mean, they could lie. They say I was strong-armed. In reality,
no, but it's really here in Mexico. I mean, politicians are generally corrupt. Not all of them. Maybe there's one or two that aren't.
Do we have any in the United States that are corrupt?
Well, it's the same all over. But as it's been an issue here, especially with people being strong-armed for their property, if there is a development where there's a partner who's an ex-politician or is a current politician, it's a red flag. Red flags just mean exercise caution. Doesn't mean cancel the deal, doesn't mean something bad's going to happen. But it's an important piece of information that people should know that should factor in the decision to for their risk tolerance.
Spencer, are you seeing more of this in certain states than others?
I think I've seen some on the coast where Cancun is. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw a few recently in Nayarit.
That's correct. And what about Chapala and Guadalajara, where you're at?
In Chapala and Guadalajara, I haven't seen it there. We have other issues that are that come up here, which also can come up there. So we have a lot of people that are building more than they should build, and a lot of buildings that are irregular. One client, we investigated the property before he purchased. He was going to pay 20 million pesos for a property, which is a little over $1 million, to find out there was no certificate of habitability. You couldn't move in or use the property because they overbuilt, expecting they could sue or bribe someone. The government changed. The old government wouldn't take the bribe. The new government wouldn't take the bribe. So he basically would have bought a property that he legally couldn't inhabit.
Can you explain what that letter means? Because I think that's not a familiar term for most Americans and Canadians.
Well, a certificate of habitability means everything's finally done. The property's signed off by the municipal government. You're able to inhabit it and use the property. Without that final step, technically you can't move into it, you can't use it. So why would you buy a property that you can't use? So I like to put in or add to construction contracts, the final payment will be made once in a contingent on the certificate of habitability. Because why pay 100% for a property, move in, and down the road the government comes and does a clausurado and shuts it down and says no one can enter the property. Well, I just paid 20 million pesos. What do you mean I can't enter my own property?
Also, Spencer, what are some of the red flags you would say to prospective buyers to look out for when dealing with sellers and agents and like a resale contract?
Well, for a long time, I would see contracts where agents were a bit greedy. They would put no contingencies. And I'd see a lot of people lose money. People had, I'm going to sell my house and buy this house. Well, normally you just put a contingency. Hey, they got to sell this house. And if you get another buyer, they give the first buyer the first right of refusal, or else no. But with the contingency, they wouldn't lose their deposit. People here were losing $50,000 because the agents were lazy and they didn't want to risk their commission. No one's on your side. The notary only gets paid if the deal goes through. The seller only gets paid if it sells. Both agents get commission if it sells. So no one's your friend. And there's a lot of conflict of interest against the buyer. People say, well, Spencer, no, we have our own in-house attorney. Well, they're going to rubber stamp it, because why would their in-house attorney go against them? A good agent will know that they can guide their buyer to buy something. If not this, they're going to buy something else. You'll get paid one way or another. But there are a lot of people out there that just don't care and want to get paid right away.
Yeah, absolutely. In Vallarta now we have, I think just in the MLS, we have over 800 agents. And I would say a lot of them are brand new. They don't know. They're making a lot of mistakes. I had someone interview to become an agent over here just recently. And my assistant asked him during the interview process, why do you want to become an agent? And his response was, well, friends of mine told me real estate agents make a lot of money, and that's what I'm interested in doing. And I thought, if you're joining my team just for the money, I'm not interested. You need to be ethical and truly want to help people that need you. They're looking for guidance, and you're a complete stranger, and they're entrusting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars with you. And if you're just doing it for the money, it's all about yourself. It should be all about them. So
yes.
That, to me, that was a big red flag. Question for you. You said people losing their deposits. Now, in Vallarta, we use escrow. Escrow is not a common term that's known all throughout Mexico. So in Chapala, when someone's putting down a deposit, usually the good faith deposit here in Vallarta is 10%. Is it the same in Chapala and Guadalajara? And do you guys use escrow? If not, how do you guys hold the 10%?
So can you explain the escrow that you use?
The escrow companies?
Yes.
Well, there's Secure Title Latin America. There's TLA. They're based out of, I think, was it Houston or Dallas? I can't remember, in Texas. And also there's Armor Secure based out of Mexico City. And there are a few others, but I'm not familiar with them, so we don't use them.
So, escrow and title insurance really haven't existed here. Many erroneously agencies will say, oh yeah, we'll put your money in escrow. But I had escrow accounts in the US where I was licensed. I had a fidelity bond, which meant they get paid if I stole the money, millions of dollars E&O insurance. If an innocent, not intentional error caused loss, they would get paid. And there were trust accounts that I couldn't commingle. You had to have only a maximum of maybe $100 euro money in the account. You had to have reports that separated each client's funds. and have everything accounted for. Here the real estate agencies will have accounts, they will handle the funds, but there are no instructions. I had one deal that a major company in Chapala took the 10%. The property used to be ejido. During the investigation, we found that it wasn't registered with the National Agrarian Registry, so they couldn't sell it. The buyer got mad and yelled at the real estate company, so he just said, "Oh, you're going to treat me bad? I'm not giving your deposit back." I mean, this is a major international company that he felt butthurt because he got scolded because he didn't do his homework. Instead of doing it right and saying, "I'm sorry," giving the guys money back, we had to threaten suit and filing charges against him for it. You have these companies that, will accommodate, but that's also the importance of a good contract. So here in Mexico, there's an action called a pro forma action. So that's, hey, if you complied with the contract and the seller will not sign the deed, you can sue and get a judicial deed. So we make sure all contracts are rock solid, and it's easy to comply with the contract. All the terms specified, the bank accounts to deposit to, dates to deposit, everything. So if the seller breaches, then you can sue and get a judicial deed.
Question. I'm going to go back a couple of minutes. You're talking about did you just mention like the agency held a deposit in their account?
In Chapala.
That's a big no-no.
But that's been a common practice because it's been the lesser of the evils. I mean, normally you give the deposit to the seller. Well, who's the seller? Some guy you just met? And we've seen sellers abscond with it. Now, there was a one-man shop who started defaulting on obligations in Chapala, and I had a transaction that we helped with the legal papers for, and the guy collected $300-something thousand and just decided, this is a lot of money, I'm going to run off with it. And that's the risk. I mean, the risk is some random seller you just met giving money to him, but with a good contract, you get a judicial deed. You got these real estate companies, and if it's a small office or one-man office or a guy that's new, not a nationwide chain that owns their building and been there for 10, 15 years, there's going to be a lot of risk. But even then, it's not like escrow in the U.S. You have instructions where it's very clean cut, very legal, very regulated. It's just very loosey-goosey here in Mexico.
Well, that's our company here. I mean, they don't really have an integral role in the transaction per se in terms of, title search or what have you. They're just kind of acting like, quote unquote, a bank. They just hold the money and they disperse after closing. But I got a question. I mean, instead of, which I find it crazy, you wiring the 10% to the seller's bank. I mean, to me, I would never do that. But I've had situations where the buyer, had a certified check for that 10% and the notary held it. It was made out to the seller, but the notary was holding that 10% certified check. Is that something that you guys still do, or do you guys do that in Chapala?
No, I mean, for years and years, the practice was the deposit passed to the seller. And sometimes, I'm buying a property now and said, well, let's do a contract. They said, oh, if you want to buy a quick, let's just go right to the notary. I said, well, no, you want a deposit. I don't want to pay money unless I have a contract specifying a price and so forth. Because if there's a breach and you have no contract, how are you going to sue and get a judicial deed? The practice in Mexico has been that. Escrow has been difficult here in Mexico because the tax authorities will tax you. If I take money to hold for someone, it's a deposit. They're going to want to charge me the IVA sales tax and income tax unless I can show, oh, the money went out, paid to this person. But foreigners just coming to Mexico don't have a tax ID number. I can't give them an official tax receipt. So it's all going to be presumed income subject to both of those taxes. And that's why really there's no escrow companies in Mexico. I'm not sure how the one that's located here does it, or unless they send the money to outside accounts. Many of the real estate companies have accounts in the U.S., so they're not having to explain to the tax authorities, that these deposits aren't income, and with their rigid rules, be forced to pay, huge amounts in taxes.
Yeah. Well, the escrow companies that we use, their U.S. dollar accounts are usually in the States, like with the Citibank in New York. Mm-hmm. So that's where the funds sit. And then at the closing, the deeds are signed. The notary, when I started real estate about 20 years ago, we used escrow back then. And after the closing, we had a simple copy of the deed, certificate of no liens, a fully executed escrow disbursement. And it was the agent who there were scanners back then, fax machines, and we used to fax them, but we also used to scan all those documents and then email them to the escrow company, and they would verify that, yes, the title is indeed transferred, everything is signed, and then they would disperse the funds. But Vallarta is primarily a U.S. dollar market, so these escrow companies have dollar accounts with Citibank or some other bank in the United States, and that's where the funds would sit, and then from there it would get dispersed.
Yeah, that's much more. I mean, it's much more secure, but that seems to be the exception, not the rule, as far as Mexico in general. So if the people listening or watching buy in Vallarta, well, that's a viable option. But also, you need, many Mexican sellers don't like people getting mortgages because it's extra time and hassle. So if they don't want a mortgage, escrow, it's like, well, wait a second, I'm not getting the money. Well, who's this company? Who's this third party getting the money? And if it's priced in pesos, it's going to be more confusing with the exchange rates. So, I mean, escrow is great if you have American buyer buying in Vallarta, paying in dollars, but outside of the coastal area there, not necessarily the case. It may not work as fluid.
Thanks for listening to Live by Design Mexico Edition. If there's a topic you'd love for us to cover, email us at info@tanielchemsian.com. We'd love to hear your ideas. And be sure to subscribe, share the show with a friend, and join me each week as we explore how to create freedom, adventure, and live by design under the Mexican sun. Design your days now, and your future will follow.